Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen and today I have a video. It's gonna be kind of chatty and just reflective, more questions than answers, but I thought it'd be fun to do. So today I wanted to talk about some recent just reflections, thoughts that I've had about being on BookTube, about being a book reviewer, and how to generally be a better reviewer. And kind of my goal for the rest of this year and going into next year is partially focusing on doing that and trying to really critically think about how to review books in a really good way for you all. And so this is going to be, a chatty discussion, mostly just me asking questions to this camera, but I would love to get your feedback on the questions that I pose here, just any kind of reflections you have on maybe my channel or just reviews that you like seeing generally. Typically what those reviews have that you really like, I would love to get your feedback on all of that. Also at the end of this video, I have a literary criticism TBR that I've been compiling over the last few weeks of books that I really want to get into. So yeah, today I don't have a drink with me. I'm not really in the mood for a drink right at this very moment, so I'm gonna pass on this video, the one rare video where I do not share a beverage. But yeah, so let's just get into the reflections. So this might be a telling sign, I guess, for reviewing generally. I'm going into this with no notes or anything. I could have written down some notes. Like yesterday, I was just thinking about these questions that I'm posing and really thinking about just what it means to be a good critic, I guess. So briefly prefacing all of this is going to be a ramble all over the place. I'm not organized, which that's not a good thing for a review, I find. Well, maybe you like that. If you like it, just, off the cuff kind of rambly review, which I sometimes do, let me know. I guess I shouldn't invalidate that kind of review right off the jump. I'm just assuming that people like some structure. But I guess what kind of started my thoughts on all of this is recently I've been really getting into content or writing that's about fiction and about books. So for example, recently I've been reading some criticism from Brandon Taylor. He started a Substack in which he is talking about a lot of books that I've been reading. So he wrote this really good piece about fake accounts and Rachel Cusk's Second Place, and I really loved it. And I just love reading his thoughts on books. And so it made me think just kind of thinking about my own reviews. What am I doing well or versus not? Or generally, how do I be a better critic? I want to be big brained is what this video is basically saying. Not that that is the end all be all of having a BookTube channel or anything like that. It's not really my goal per se to have the best review out there or something of a book, but I do want to constantly challenge myself to really think about why I think things about books. And I think one way of doing that is through reading more criticism about books and seeing what I like that these writers are doing in their criticism, and hopefully trying to emulate that with my own perspective on things to get a better review out, I guess. I will say I think my reviews are much better than when I first started booktubing. I feel like I was very surface level and didn't really dive into it as much as I wanted to, but I still feel like I could be doing a little bit more in my reviews that I'm not currently doing. Yeah, that was kind of the spark of all of this. I started reading some literary criticism recently. Another one was the George Saunders book that I've been repping a ton this year. I loved it so much. I just love reading about books. Books about books generally. And so this all sparked my thoughts on all of this. And another thing, I watch, a good amount of BookTube, and there's some reviewers on here, there's too many to name, but I just love their content. And not that it's I don't want to compare myself to other people. Everyone has their own unique perspective on BookTube, but I really appreciate those reviews that really dive into a text and really confront it and think about it deeply. And I feel like sometimes while I'm reading a book, I have these ideas that I'm ooh, this would be a good idea to say in my BookTube review, or I want to make sure I get this out, but then I don't write it down, or I forget it, or I sit down to film a video and I just kind of do it off the top of my head and I don't get everything out that I wanted to. Sometimes in editing, I think about some of the things that I've been missing in my review that I was oh damn, I should have mentioned that one cool thing that happened in chapter 6 or something, or I really like this one theme that's explored in this book that I didn't really touch on in my review. And one idea I've had is trying to take some more notes in terms of things that come up in my head, make sure I write it down briefly, even if it's just kind of chicken scratch, briefly getting it down just so I remember to touch on it, and then maybe start going into videos with at least a bullet list of touch points that I want to make sure I hit. I guess one thing going into this part of the video though is I don't want this goal of mine to hinder my reading experience at all. I don't want books to ever feel like a chore for myself. I am doing this purely for fun and purely because I love reading books and I love talking with people about books. And so I want to do this in the hopes of just being a better critical thinker in terms of how I approach particularly fiction, but I don't want it to be too burdensome. I don't want to feel like I have to write an essay after every book I write, or I don't want to just be too critical on myself because at the same time, this is purely for fun. So I hope that makes sense. I want to balance the two. And so this is just me talking to myself to the camera. Hopefully you all enjoy this. But so yeah, those are kind of the thoughts I've been having And I want to dive into some literary criticism. For example, with the George Saunders book, that book really made me think about short stories in a completely new way in terms of exploring general themes of humanity that's often explored in short stories, but also looking at craft and how the story is unfolded throughout the storytelling, basically, and what an effective story does versus what an ineffective story fails to do or does that's not really a good payoff for a reader. I think that is going to be helpful for me in terms of figuring out how to be a better reviewer. I hope this all makes sense. These are just my thoughts that I'm having on this, of course, open to any feedback on what I'm saying. But yeah, so I thought I would go over a couple of books that are on my TBR that I've been compiling that I really want to engage with throughout the rest of this year and hopefully get something out of them. And I guess I'll do another video down the line reflecting on all of this, maybe like in 6 months from now, and just see kind of how it went. So the first book that I recently read that sparked some more ideas on this topic was The Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner. This is a book of criticism, really tiny, in which Ben Lerner reflects on why poetry, in terms of both readers and poets alike, why it's often a maligned format, and thinking about why poetry is often deemed bad, or when poets fail at writing a good poem, like what does that really mean? Like what are they failing at, in terms of thinking about poetry as getting at like the root of humanity, of thinking about how it's supposed to transcend other forms of fiction, I guess. And so that was a really awesome book that really made me excited about reading more literary criticism, because I just loved his ideas. I love a good big brain author, I like when an author challenges my perception and thoughts on certain types of work, I guess. So that was a really good one. Another book that I'm currently reading that has some literary criticism in it is The Hard Crowd by Rachel Kushner, in which she talks about a couple of authors so far, including Dennis Johnson, Cormac McCarthy, Marguerite Duras, I believe that's how you say her name. These are all authors that I really want to read now based on the brief essays that she wrote about those authors. And I love just getting into her brain the way that these works affected her and how she's able to talk about that in a way that's innovative, but also not too academic, I would say. I like the blend that she does of mixing the personal with the big-brainedness of it all. I really liked that, and I hope I can kind of emulate some of that in my reviewing as well, or just be able to think about truly why I like or connect with certain works. I started doing this with my books about longing video, but I want to keep doing it. I want to keep pushing myself, because I think that's one goal that I had with starting BookTube, is just being a better critic, better reflecting on the books that I read, not just rushing through them to have more content, to briefly talk about them in a wrap up and then move on with my life. I really want to engage with text more meaningfully. So that was another one that sparked this. In my Instagram stories, I basically did a call for like any books on literary criticism, and the one and only Brandon Taylor responded to my story and said this next book, which is Love and Death in the American Novel by Leslie Fiedler. I remembered him tweeting about this book a couple of months ago, I believe, and I rediscovered that thread on Twitter, and he was having a blast with this book, and so now I'm so excited to read it. It's actually out of print. I actually had to go on eBay to find a copy of this, and I actually found one for $9 when some of them were going for like $50, $100, and I was like, oh shit, am I gonna be able to read this? But I did find one, and I think it might be signed. I can't tell if it's a printed signature or was actually signed, so I think it might be worth some money, which is cool. I'll have to do some more digging on that, but long story short, I don't know too much about this book. I want to save Brandon's thread on this book for when I actually dive into it, because I want to reflect on what he got out of this book a lot, and he seemed to be very amused by it. And if he's repping the book that hard and recommending it to me, which was like the coolest thing ever, I can't believe I've engaged in like conversations with Brandon Taylor, like what? But yeah, so I bought this one and I'm very excited for this one. This is one I definitely will read, or at least take a stab at. I'm a little bit worried about this one because I think this was written in the 60s, if I recall, and I'm not really well versed in classic literature. And so I think this book is going to delve into a lot of the classics that I have not read, but I think it'll make me excited to read more of those and just see the growth, I guess, of the American novel, and see Leslie Fiedler's kind of analysis of where things went into the 60s and see how it measures up to today. I know a lot of the present discussions about literary criticism are about like autofiction, about internet novels, about experimental form in terms of breaking up text, like in fragmentary texts. And so yeah, I'm excited to see the parallels there, if any. But that should be a fun one. Another one that I have that was recommended to me is James Wood. So I found he has a book called How Fiction Works, which I found at my library. All I know is it kind of analyzes fiction generally, the format, narratives, setting, plot, characters, and why we connect to fiction in certain ways. And so I'm excited to see his perspective. I know he's a really prolific critic. I think he writes mostly in the New Yorker. So that would be a fun one as well. My initial research into literary criticism seemed to be quite white and male-centric. And so I wanted to add some diverse reads into my TBR. And so I found Toni Morrison has a book that I requested from my library that is not in yet that is called Playing in the Dark, Whiteness in the Literary Imagination. So I'm very excited for this one. It's crazy that I have not read Toni Morrison yet. I have like 5 of her books. I really need to get on that, but so I have it pulled up here. It says, "It's an immensely persuasive work of literary criticism that opens a new chapter in the American dialogue on race and promises to change the way we listen to American literature." So it says, "Morrison shows how much the themes of freedom and individualism, manhood and innocence depended on the existence of a black population that was manifestly unfree, and that came to serve white authors as embodiments of their own fears and desires." So I know this shit's about to slap. Toni Morrison's a genius. And so I'm very excited to add that to the TBR. And I also have a book that's been on my shelves for a while that I haven't read is How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Chee. My friend on Instagram, Hunter at Shelf by Shelf, he loves this book, loves Chee, and it was recommended to me a couple of times. So I'm excited for this one in terms of, I've also been wanting to dabble maybe in some writing. My friend Hunter, he kind of encouraged me recently to at least try writing stories, and I want to try. I'm very nervous. I'm afraid of defeat and self-criticism, and I'm just too nervous to try it, but I'm wondering if that book might help me explore writing generally. But yeah, so that'll be a fun one to read as well. And the last book I have on my list is a book that's coming out soon from FSG, which is What About the Baby by Alice McDermott. This comes out August 17th, and I think it's just mostly essays about fiction, and I don't know too much about it, but it looked good from what I saw in NetGalley. So that's the total amount of books that I really want to consider reading for this project, I guess, in terms of me trying to be a better reviewer. But another one briefly that I don't have and I haven't really looked into, How to Read Literature Like a Professor. I've seen this one at bookstores for like years now, and I just never picked it up. I wasn't really a book reviewer at the time, but let me know if you read that one, because it seems quite popular, and I'm intrigued by that too. I feel like some reviewers on here are just so naturally good at it, and for me, it's a little bit of a challenge in terms of me trying to like off the cuff tell you my thoughts on things, especially things that I read maybe like weeks ago, and trying to remember everything and synthesize it into something that's good. This is Jalen's path to being big-brained. We'll see if it works or not. But yeah, feel free to leave comments below, follow me on Instagram, and you can hit me up in the DMs. Love talking to people on there as well. I will say, if you do DM me, I am a big fan of voice noting, so I'm just saying I might send you some voice notes. I hope you're okay with that. No pressure to also send me voice notes. I know people don't like doing that sometimes, but it's so much easier, you know? But anyways, that about does it for this video. I hope you enjoy. If you have any recommendations also for literary criticism that you loved, drop them below. I don't know if anyone's gonna watch this video. It's very like a niche subject, I guess, that's not really talked about much on BookTube in terms of literary criticism itself, but hopefully some of y'all will enjoy this. So, all right, until next time, fake cheers.